Welcome. This video is the test of a technique that I'm going to call the Schwarzwald Technique for axe felling a back-leaning tree. How can you fell a tree against its lean if you use an axe to cut out the face cut and the back cut? That's what this video is going to be about. So in this video, I'm working on felling emerald ash borer killed green ash, and this was taken late February of last winter, so I'm just getting around to editing the footage now. And the context for this is part of the Axe Cordwood Challenge. So it's briefly, that's an informal annual challenge to cut firewood using only an axe. And there's lots of information in previous videos for me and other people, so I'll link to some of those for more info. And there's also a Facebook group, so check that out if you're interested. Before I go any further, I should probably issue a disclaimer, which is that this is not instructional, and I wouldn't be qualified to teach anybody who doesn't already know how to fell trees, how to do it. And this is something that I tried once. It's based on an old historic video that's heavily edited, brief, and narrated in a language that I don't speak. So I can't promise that it will work for you or that it will be safe. It just worked for me once, and this is basically documenting what I did and how I think it works. So the point of doing this is basically the same purpose as the Cordwood Challenge. It's learning a traditional skill, maybe some of the history around it, be outside, get into the woods, get exercise, and get some firewood and maybe some lumber. So what I'm doing right now is I'm working on a technique that's called a rounding. And this is something that you do when you're cutting with a very low stump. And it's actually necessary for this technique to work. And that'll become apparent why later, so I'll explain it later. But if you want to know a little bit more about rounding, there's actually this year for the Axe Cordwood Challenge, there's a new mini challenge, which is the low stump challenge. And I have a video laying that out. It was Owen Jarvis's idea, so that he's Elemental Force on YouTube. But I actually did this before Owen suggested this challenge. So to make the low stump challenge, I actually did a simpler felling job with the lean, just to not overcomplicate it. But this is the slightly more complicated situation. This is against the lean. The axe I'm using is a Haltsbrook Agdor Montreal 3.5 pound. It's been modified to have a narrower bit, sort of like a Berliner pattern. And the story behind that, why I had to do that, is in another video I recently uploaded. So if you're curious, you can check it out there. The subject of this video is pretty niche, so I think most people watching it will already be familiar with the basics of tree felling and chopping down a tree with an axe, but I'll go over it to set the stage a little bit anyway. Basically, to cut down a tree with an axe, it's similar to how you would cut it down with a chainsaw. You start with an undercut or a face cut in the direction you want it to fall, and then you cut a back cut until you get close to it. The band of wood that's left between the back cut and the face cut is the hinge. And the hinge and the face cut determines which way the tree is going to fall. And so the main constraint with this method of felling with an axe is that you can only fell it with the lean plus or minus, say, 45 degrees or something. So you have maybe a 100-degree arc in which you can place the tree, but you can't do it against the lean. So for a back leaner, which is a tree felled opposite or against this lean, the usual way to do it is with a saw and wedges. So usual as in the Axe Cordwood Challenge. So it's the only time you can use a saw in the Axe Cordwood Challenge is for felling a back leaner. And basically this works because the back cut with a saw leaves a narrow kerf that you can jam wedges in and use those wedges, pound them in to open up the kerf, tip the tree over. It's also important to note that even if the tree sits back, it's not normally going to fall backwards, even though it's leaning backwards, because the saw cut will close. Now, you'll be in trouble if your saw is pinched in there, but that's what the wedges are for, to prevent that. You can also use rigging, so ropes and block and tackle or winches, or a jack to fell a back leaning tree, but that's a topic for a different video. Interestingly, using saws, even cross-cut felling saws, for felling trees is not really that old of a practice. From what I've read, it only became really common way to fell a tree in the latter half of the 19th century. So from then until power saws, the crosscut saw was really only used for about 100 years as a major felling method. And that's a lot shorter reign than the axe had. So if you're just going to use an axe to fell a tree, how would that work? So for a long time, the only idea I'd come across about this was in the Axe book by Dudley Cook. This is a must-have book if you're interested in axemanship, and it has all sorts of stuff about how to use an axe, felling and forestry with an axe, hanging, grinds, patterns, all sorts of great information. I mean, I wouldn't take it all as gospel, but I definitely recommend the book. So Cook's method, as described in the book, is basically kind of a last resort special trick method. That's how he describes it. And basically what you do is you cut out a square back cut, like you cut out a notch and make it square, and then you need a block that you make yourself, a block of wood fitted so it just fits into that square notch. And then you can pound wedges between the notch and the block to tip the tree. And that just seemed impractical to me. And I think it seems impractical to Cook too. Because this is what he says about it. He says, chopping out the back cut to accommodate wedges on a block is not an ideal system by any means. Under the best of conditions, wedges can suddenly jump out of the cut as you might pop a watermelon seed from your mouth. Using a block for the wedges to sit on only increases the chance of this occurring. Chopping a level top to the back cut is an extra chore, and the back cut itself must be specially prepared. Nevertheless, you should know the tricks of felling, and this is one that requires no more exotic machinery than a wedge and a block you can make yourself. So there's clearly reasons why you might want to do something like this, to be kind of a complete axeman, which is what Dudley Cook is going for, but it's impractical. So I just had no real interest in trying this out. It just seemed like it was difficult and dangerous, and it just didn't appeal to me at all. And that was until I came across a 1955 documentary on YouTube called Die letzten Holzriesen im Schwarzwald. So I think that translates to the last giants of the Black Forest. And so the Black Forest is forested mountain range in southern Germany, famous for timber production as a major industry, as well as the cake and lots of other things. Anyway, I'll link to that video. It's about traditional forestry in the Black Forest, and it shows a traditional felling method using only axes. And watching these guys suck on a pipe and swing an axe at elevation just hurts my chest vicariously. But anyway, what they do is they use a triangular block to kind of pin the wedges in the back cut and wedge the tree over. So that seemed like something workable. At least to me, it's something that would be worth trying. So that's what I'm going to do. One thing I wondered is, why didn't they use saws? And so if you watch the rest of the video, there's a big focus on how they get the logs out of the mountains. And it turns out they carve the stump end of the log into a smooth kind of snout, and they send them down ice chutes in the winter. And so if you have to chop the log ends into kind of points anyway, there's no benefit of having a flat sawn cut. So I think that's why, but that's just an inference on my part. Okay, let's get back to my tree. So there's the curly grain. You can see it right there at the root buttresses where the grain's all tangled. It makes it tricky to chop through, and in theory that's the advantage of an axe with a short bit, so like a narrow cutting edge. Because it just makes it easier. It definitely is, like if the grain's not straight, it definitely is harder to chop for some reason. So that makes sense to me. Okay, rounded. Definitely not as pretty as the old professionals would do it, but it's my first time trying to do this. And hopefully it's going to work. The wind's picked up a little bit. Unfortunately, it's not in my favor, but it's not high enough to make me give up for today. But I do have to go and try and warm my feet up. So I'm going to go in and have lunch. There's the lean. You can see it's got a fork, and one of the forks is pulling it more bit towards me and in that direction to the left. And I'm going to try and follow it that way, just to avoid smashing some other trees I want to keep, and so I can follow it into the open. So that's the plan. One unusual thing about this technique is that you have to start with the back cut first. That's something I've never tried before with an axe. But in this case, I can't think of another way to do it. In the Schwarzwald documentary, it looks like there's two guys working. One's working on the back cut, one's working on the front cut, sort of at the same time. It's not clear exactly how they're doing it, but I just can't see any alternative rather than to do the back cut first and get the block and wedges set so that the tree doesn't fall backwards in the direction that it's leaning, which is what would happen if the face cut was cut first and then you started on the back cut. Because with an axe cut notch, there's no way to have the wedges hold it while you're working on it. So this is the only way as far as I can figure. The support block that I'm using is just basically a piece of firewood. It's split from a round of ash, and I just dressed it a little bit and took off the corners. I thought that would help it fit a little better when I set it into the notch. I had to do a little bit of adjusting because the support block didn't quite, set into the notch as tightly as I wanted. And that's one thing I think is good about doing it this way, where you have a normal triangular notch and a block that's set up to fit that. Because I think that you can make adjustments. I mean, I was able to. And I think that would be very difficult with the square block, square notch setup that's shown in Dudley Cook's book. I just think that if you didn't get a good fit on the first try, it would be very difficult to do much to fix that. So I think that this method is better for a number of reasons, and that's one of them. I'm pinning the block in place with a railroad spike. That worked quite well, but it did end up causing some issues. I'll go over that at the end of the video. Having enough room to put in the spike and where the wood is tough, where it's not going to split out, That's the reason why rounding is necessary for this technique to work. It's really important to get the wedges and the support block set really solidly before you start cutting the face cut, I think. These wedges are socket wedges from Ochsenkopf, and just like they use in the Schwarzwald video, but I have had them for a while and I have a whole video on them. And it's pretty cool to see that some other people have started to get socket wedges for splitting and things like that in North America. All right, now it's time to chop out the face cut. I'm almost done chopping out the face cut. I planned it out and chopped it so that I would leave a hinge about 3 to 4 centimeters wide between the face cut and the back cut. So now I'm going to go around and start driving the wedges. I don't think you need socket wedges. I think having some sort of high lift wedge is probably beneficial, but I think, yeah, plastic wedges would probably work for this. But an advantage of these socket wedges is they are high lift and you can drive them further in than you can with a plastic wedge because you've got the big peg at the back to drive it in. All right, so it worked. That's pretty awesome. Even though, you know, it was a decently heavy lean and I was fighting the wind, this block method did work. Anyway, good hinge. Worked. And then the wedges worked well, even though it was a heavy lean. Once I started, I was like, ooh, this is pretty heavy. And I was fighting the wind a bit. I did start to use another wedge. This is just an all wooden wedge with a metal ring, kind of a makeshift glut. Well, no, it's a glut. This is makeshift as they ever are. System worked, of course. Not the fastest way to fell a tree, but it is a cool axe technique, and That's what I'm here to find out about. So I did have to drive it in pretty far. It might be a little overkill, actually. Might have trouble getting that. So I did indeed had a lot of trouble getting the spike back out. It was really a chore. It was a bear to get out. And so after I did get it out, I sort of decided that it would be better to use something smaller, like maybe a lag bolt with the threads filed off, something like that. But now with some time to consider, I think I've actually decided that a railway spike is the right way to go. It's got a bunch of advantages. One is it's kind of asymmetrical, so it can sit tight against the support block. The head is asymmetrical, and it's got a big overhang, so you can use that to kind of bash it from underneath and get it out. And so I think the thing to do would be to grind it down so it's smaller and tapered. And then it would be easier to drive in and easier to take out, and it would still do the job. Okay. An idea that I briefly considered before deciding it was really a bad idea is whether you could get this system to work while chopping higher up on the trunk. So do the back cut and the face cut kind of more normally higher up the stump or on the trunk. And the reason I think that's a bad idea is because I was always taught not to cut the back cut at an angle. So no like 45-degree angle sloping down towards the face cut. And the reason is, at least if you're going to use a wedge, the reason is that when you drive the wedge in, then there's not just force kind of pushing down against the stump, but there's also force pushing out the side. And so this potential that the back cut could split out if it's cut that way, and that could be disastrous. And I think that because of the way the block would be set up, but that there would be a spike or two driven in there, it would just, have a high chance of something like that happening. And so that's why I would avoid that. And that is my advice. If anyone wants to try it, stick with the low stump. So what would I change if I was to attempt this again? I think I could make some improvements to the technique. I did already mention the railway spikes and how some adjustment to a railway spike would make it easier to get out, basically, and easier to put in. I also think maybe using 2 railway spikes would be a good idea. I did have this sense that it was a little precarious when I was driving in the wedges. I thought, well, there must be a lot of force, and I really hope my railway spike was centered. Maybe having 2 would just at least make me feel better, if not actually make a big difference. The other thing would be I probably don't need to be such a try-hard with the rounding. I probably could have done less extreme rounding and still had it work out okay. It would have taken a little less time. Probably the most important change I would make is to keep more tension wood. So maybe do the rounding on the back where I'm doing the back cut, but hold off on rounding away the tension wood on the face cut side, just so that the tree is more stable and I have more room for error during the back cut part of the process. Certainly there's a lot of room to improve in just my general technique, how well I did it, how fast I did it. I should probably also make myself a larger support block. If I do it again, especially with a larger tree, that one was almost too narrow for the job. So that made me a bit nervous. Definitely a bigger one of those would be in order for next time, if there is a next time. Even if I never end up doing this again, as Dudley Cook wrote, if you're interested in axes and using them, you should know the tricks of felling. And so now I think I know another trick of felling. It was successful. I'm happy about that. And I hope that you guys found it interesting.